And I wanted to start out with 3 questions, and these are very short answers. Just say A, B, or, and we come back to those 3 questions. So would you say you're an extrovert or an introvert?
Really? Extrovert.
Extrovert?
Introvert.
Introvert?
Introvert.
Introvert?
Extrovert.
Extrovert. Okay, so you're hiring someone for your team, senior guy. The first guy, A, he's loyal, he's an incredibly fast learner. He knows you since a long time, you've worked with him before. He listens extremely well, works hard. That's type A. Type B is, he's definitely smarter than you are in that particular area you're hiring him for. And you'll know that you will have a challenge to manage him, but he's the best guy in his field. A or B?
B.
B.
B. B.
This is scary.
Then third question is the bug question. So you have to make a choice today. You get the same lifestyle money as you do today, but you have to live on the beach. No more biotech and all that running around. That's A. B, it's definitely less money, but you will start another biotech company. A or B?
B.
B.
B. Whoa, difficult. Can I just be on the boat, Jens?
We have both.
On the boat.
Both.
All right, so we come back to these 3 things. So I'm trying to figure out whether there's a rhyme or reason why you become an entrepreneur. And there's some things that I think are common themes, but some things don't fit. And one thing I find interesting, for example, is you have a very good mix of extroverts and introverts. Yeah. And then if you look at the team dynamics, they're very much depend whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, the way how you build your team. So, so I think how we should start is, do a very short intro of who you are, what you're doing today, but then really, tell the story how you got into, entrepreneurial biotech in the first place. Why don't you start with
me?
Yeah.
So I'm Andy Sandham. The reason I'm going for the boat option is that I'm on startup number 12 and I don't want to do 13. So, but seriously, so my background is originally in science. I kind of fell into entrepreneurial business and science, and that was because I was fortunate enough to fall into cell tech when it was just being formed and didn't know quite what cell tech was. For those of you who don't know, it was the first UK proper biologics biotech company. And just fell into opportunities to do startups and never looked back. Really enjoyed it and got to know investors and became hooked. And I suppose, if looking back, I think the thing I like doing and I'm good at is the first 3 to 5 years, definitely not after. And so I'm a starter. I think in John's words, not necessarily a completer, but a handing over person. So get it started, get it operating, create some value, hand it to the next person to build. I'm currently working on both sides of the fence. I'm a partner with Syncona, which is an evergreen investment vehicle of the Wellcome Trust, building companies with a 20-year view, but also doing a startup for them in clinical genomics out of the Sanger Institute.
Rod?
I'm Rod Richards. I run a clinical stage biopharma company. My background basically, and I've run and started 3 biotechs, or in fact this is the 4th one. So I'm a little bit behind in terms of Andy's 13.
Don't catch up.
Effectively, I've been doing this for the last 15 years. Prior to that, I ran business development within Glaxo Wellcome before it became GlaxoSmithKline. And so therefore, I'm a commercial person by background, but have worked largely within the R&D space, providing commercial inputs to R&D for most of my career, or most of my career before starting biotechs. I've run biotechs in very different sectors, both in biologicals and in small molecules. I mean, the thing that the buzz for me, it's very much similar to Andy, it's the first 3 to 5 years and the ability of actually creating substantial value from a relatively early stage through to actually handing that on, knowing full well that that's got an opportunity to deliver substantial value for a larger partner.
I'm Roger Bone. I am with Johnson & Johnson Innovation and I support business development. Where I kind of started in the industry was at Merck, and after a few years I left to join a startup as the 5th employee. We didn't have a lab, we didn't have an office, we didn't have any money. we just had an idea, and we grew the company to about 200 people and sold it to J&J about a little over 10 years ago. And I've been with J&J since, so I remember those days fondly. Now with working business development, I'm also supporting a number, probably a half a dozen spin-outs. So I'm out there like an entrepreneur looking for money. You're looking for somebody to take on the project and take it forward, and looking forward to getting a number of those started. Maybe not a dozen though.
Neill?
I'm an entrepreneur by mistake. I made several mistakes in my career in that I'm a scientist, of course. Hopefully we're all scientists, so I'm immunologist by training. And I thought my career was being a lecturer and then a prof of some wonderful department in the UK. So I went up to lecturer and then decided this is, oh God, I don't think I could ever be a prof. So pharma then said join us, so I got headhunted into pharma. And it was great because I was doing the same thing, but they were paying me more, which you might think that's obvious to do, but at that time you didn't join pharma, you didn't move, you know, you're an academic, you didn't do pharma. So they gave me this more money, company car, blah, 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 and I didn't have to apply for a grant ever again. Yay! So I did that for a bit. Then, of course, didn't like the politics in pharma. So I actually left. I said, where are you going, Neill? I said, I don't know, I haven't got a job. I just left after 5 years. Welcome. Lovely company. So within the year, I'd started the first company. Out of LMB, Greg Winter's lab. Gene therapy. Now, gene therapy in '95 was the place to be. Apparently, it's the place to be now, but it was definitely the place to be in '95. That's where the money was going. Okay, so I followed the tech where the money was going, which might be a problem for some of you because you might have techs that aren't where the money are right now, but don't worry about it, it'll happen. That's '95. Remember, that's 20 years later. Now it's trendy, so you'll be okay. So '95, started the first gene therapy company out of LMB, and then after a year, the MRC said, we can't have 2 gene therapy companies in the UK. What? Okay, so I left that. There was MRC spin out. I started the second gene therapy, which was the third gene therapy company. I started that one, Oxford Biomedica. We went straight on AIM, and so no VC, sorry, straight on AIM, because VC said they could tell me about the financial side. I said, well, what are you going to tell me about the financial side? And then we listed that LSE 65 million round. Then I left. Joined what is now Immunocore Adaptimmune. That was 2000. Not trendy. Now everybody tells me it's trendy, where you should be. That's why I like that, because the science was brilliant. The science absolutely still is brilliant, but the science then was brilliant. And I think I'm on my 8th spin out, Andy, so I'm not as good as you, mate. But that's a bit of a cheat, because I'm doing 3 right now. 2 immuno-oncology companies and respiratory. So it's like, for me, it's founded, joined, sold, joined, and then founded, joined. So I've not founded them all, some I've joined.
So, I mean, there's no doubt that, you know, we have 4 pretty successful people here. But I think, you know, if you start out, you worry about things can go wrong, and, you know, and the risk of jumping into entrepreneurship. So rather than asking you what your biggest success was, if you can come up probably with your worst time and how you got out of it and why you stuck with it.
Well, the worst time is right now, when you're thinking of starting, but you don't know it, good, which is good, because if you knew it, you wouldn't do it. Does that make sense? I think you know that. The worst time is now, but it's good fun now, so don't forget that. It's like, you know, I'm sounding like a dad now, aren't I? But this is the worst time trying to get that money. But just try and get it from anywhere you can think of. It's not, don't just think of, it's got to be VC. There are other sources. Scarily, your friends, colleagues, those sort of people, your mates. And now crowdfunding, phenomenal. Go for crowdfunding. There's certain companies that crowdfund. So this is the sort of worst time, but it's also the best time, I would say.
Any of you have a bad time story?
I don't know. I remember one time with three-dimensional pharmaceuticals, the biotech I was with. We had just finished a board meeting in December, and one of our investors was looking at our outlook. We had about 6 months of cash left. I don't see how you can raise money from venture capital. I don't see how you're going to raise money from institutional investors. I don't know where you're going to go. I don't know how you're going to find any more money. And 6 months later, we had raised 125 million.
Yeah.
So, but that was a kind of a dark time when didn't know if we were going to make payroll in some of those months between December and the summer when we raised all the money. So.
Been there.
Any bad stories?
Oh yeah. And again, it's a financing type story. One of the companies that I started, we had gone through 2 rounds of financing. We were at a time when the public markets window appeared to be opening, and we were potentially running towards a successful trade sale, which provided a good return for the investors. The negotiation of that ended up moving to one individual party, and we were quite close to completing that trade sale. And at the last moment, because all of a sudden the public markets seemingly were getting warm, very warm, the venture investors decided that they could get more return by actually taking the company public. So we went through, we turned down our suitor, and went to the public markets. Again, unfortunately, in the environment, we looked to raise too much money at too high a valuation. And again, my ability to be strong in front of the face of my venture investors at that stage was clearly lacking, because I was clearly under the impression that the expectation was probably too high. We went round, did a full IPO in the UK, and actually could have raised the money, but it wasn't at the valuation that they were hoping to get. In fact, it was, if anything, slightly below the valuation that we were going to get as a trade sale. So we went through the whole process, and at the last moment we pulled the IPO with a view that we would go back to the original suitor and actually sell for the price that they'd offered us. Clearly, expectation was that that might happen. Clearly was mistaken, and therefore we ended up with a very, very unpleasant negotiation with the suitor, and ended up with a trade sale at a valuation which was probably 2/3 of what we would have got should we have gone through the process 6 months before. So that was it was sort of recovering from a difficult situation and not really particularly satisfactory.
So oddly enough, I haven't had a problem raising money, but that's probably because I've always had, to some extent, the foot in the other camp. So stayed friendly with investors who will back a good project and will see a good project. My failures are spending it on the wrong things, actually. So knowing firstly what the market is and what the application is, and not kidding yourself that it will be competitive. So that was a mistake. So selecting some projects that were never going to be commercial early on and spending a year before we shut them down. That goes back about 25 years. And then they got worse after that. So taking a molecule into development, which seemed to have a manufacturing liability, a CMC liability, which nobody had owned up to in the organisation. And we'd spent about 2 million on contract manufacturing when we found out that actually it had a metastable byproduct. So that was pretty bad news. We had to shut that one down. They get worse. The third, and it's happened twice in 25 years, is data fraud. Who would think that when you hire all your own people and you trust those people? One example was actually an internal person, and in a lesson in leadership is if you put huge pressure on an organisation and make them work evenings and weekends, which we did, there becomes a compelling feeling that you have to deliver a result. And if those people aren't with you all the time, and let's say they're hidden away in some other facility, which was the case for us because we had to have an in vivo facility elsewhere. You know, one individual went off the rails, and he turned out to be a senior individual, and we lost a financing with a syndicate. We got out of it. We lost a financing with a syndicate because we uncovered the data in the middle and had to just own up and say that project is stopped. And the other one was dealing with academics. So there's several of you that are probably already in a quasi or complete academic environment. You know, I now know never to trust the supervisor of a PhD student. And I won't say which London big university this is, but actually we found to our cost that we hadn't audited carefully enough what that PhD student was doing. And that was the whole basis of our in vivo data package to advance a molecule into development. You know, and it took actually an individual who will be in the room today, she's not here at the moment, to go and audit them rigorously with a pharmaceutical hat on and find out that what was stuck in the lab book all had the same date, 3 weeks before the audit happened. So 3 years of data all stuck in. And the supervisor, who is a very reputable person, and the vice chancellor of that institute, had not paid attention. And the PhD was awarded, and the data were all fraudulent. It cost us 2 years and 3 million. So I now know a lot more to be careful with people, not put them under too much pressure so that they feel the obligation to say yes, and also in any academic collaboration to audit them as though they were a contract company, and to do clinical audit or lab book audit, scientific audit, and you know, because it's pretty difficult to tell your investors that you've spent the money on the wrong thing.
So, I mean, we have heard now, you know, a couple of things around money, and you know, we had discussions yesterday about investors and what you should do as, you know, the investee to figure out who you want to have as your investors. I mean, how do you approach raising money? You know, do you take any money? Does money have the same color, or is it really important to figure out who your investors are? And can you maybe go into a few examples?
So let's start, because John Beadle did this really well yesterday, and Matt also, in that, you know, my view is you look at the journey you're going to be on, the whole journey, and how much capital it will take to get there, and that means to market. And then you decide who's going to ride on that journey. You may take it the first step of the way. Let's say it's a drug, and you take it, you decide, I'm going to take it to phase 2. That's what I'm going to do. And then the pharma partners have done my diligence, they'll pick it up after that. So you have, the journey is, I'm going to need to raise 50 million. So I always start thinking about, if that's what I need to raise, who are the right sort of investors to have around the table for that journey? Not all at once, but who are they? If it's a £50,000 journey, it's a different sort of investor syndicate. And I've had in syndicates, both in the UK and in California, high net worths who have been a huge liability because they weren't part of the long journey we were on, and they were impatient and they didn't know what they bought. And that's net worths who put in 10,000, that was the UK company, and net worths who personally put in 4 million. And that individual I'll name, that was Jim Clark, who founded Netscape. And at every board meeting he couldn't understand why we weren't going public. And it was a nightmare to manage. So we got the wrong sort of money for the time and the journey we were on. So if you really are on not the 50,000 journey, but the 50 million journey, you sort of have to start with that first few million in mind and the right sort of investors that will make that easier to pull off. And I think, you know, that was said yesterday, it'll be harder to find them, but you need the right sort of money around the table.
I might just echo that completely. I think that you have to think about what the long run is in order to ensure that you can get the right groups in. And I mean, interestingly, there's no doubt that when you put together a financing round, the day that the investment is signed is the greatest alignment of the investor of the group that you've got. And from that moment, there's always likely to be divergence, and that's part of the CEO's role, is actually managing, understanding what those things are, because external environmental things can affect that. If you get the right group of investors together who are generally aligned towards what the end game is, it minimises that chance of disalignment.
Can you maybe comment on the lead investor, how important the lead is in any fundraising? Is it important?
can I comment on that?
Yeah,
first?
sure. Oh,
I don't see it that way at all. I've had venture funders who are definitely in for long-term big funds, who, when it came to a critical issue in the company, just wouldn't do anything. So they may come across as wonderful when you start, but 5 years down the line, when no one else is investing in your company, you may find out they're not such a wonderful set of investors you thought. So I don't think it's as linear. That we shouldn't make out as straightforward for these guys. Just to rock up to investor. The investor says, "Yeah, I'm in for a long term. Don't worry, son." And I go, "Oh, yeah, he's the one I want." No, because it'll change. It's just not like that at all. It really, guys, don't. It's not like that. There is a difference nowadays. When I say nowadays, you've got to remember I've been in it hugely. This is why we need you people, because I've been in it far too long. In terms of venture funding, that like you were getting to, lead and a syndicate. The word syndicate scares me silly, because you have to find the syndicate. Well, finding, that's bag of cat stuff. Finding 3 investors that are all aligned in Europe right now. Well, I can't, if you can name the ends, I'm impressed. I can't find, I've been rocking around all of them for all 3 companies. I can't really find many. The corporates tend to be, so that's good. If you can pick up all the corporate, MS and all this, and J&J and that, they're okay. But the others, they all have their own ways of working. So it's not as straightforward as what you would do right now is going to work for you in 5 years' time, unfortunately. It does sound like I'm saying just take the money as it is there, but in a way, it's sort of like that. If you've got someone who's happy with what you've got at the moment, and at least understands in your business that it's a 15-year play, that's a therapeutic play, versus if you've got, e-health, which you might hopefully next week. So it's definitely horses for courses, which Andy's right, but knowing what they're thinking now, and when they're at the end of the fund, and they want to, cash in, different issue, right? So that's the tricky bit. Yeah. So yeah, sorry, you were going to say lead.
I was going to say, I agree completely with you, Neil, but I think the perspective is that you have to understand where they are at the beginning, and they have to understand where you are at the beginning.
Yeah,
which is the key element.
100%.
And then you then have to manage that, because there are always going to be external things that impact that. And that can happen with corporate investors. Less so, potentially, but it can happen with corporate investors as much as it can happen with 10-year funds. Yep. But, that, again, I think is a key role of a CEO, is understanding that and being able to sort of map. That's why you need to have a strategic element in terms of, rather than heads down and operational. That's one element of a key role of the CEO.
Can I come on? You asked about the lead.
Yeah.
There are pluses and minuses for having several investors early of different shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
I worked with one company, which is an SR1 company, where we had 4 at the outset, and that we were sort of made really because they were there for the journey, and still are very much so. But without telling too many tales out of school, I'm not sure they're all entirely thought they bought the same thing at the beginning. So I think getting alignment of the 4 and continuing to work with alignment of the 4, which is the CEO's job, is hard. And if one of them has stepped up to lead, it can help. The substitute for that, in this case, is then to have somebody independent of the investors who works with the CEO and as a friend to the CEO, as a chair or a non-executive, who then tries to keep it all on an even keel and everybody open in the minds in the right direction. And I'm fairly fanatical about independent chairs. I know that not every fund is. That's probably because I am one. But so it's self-serving really, isn't it, as a career? But I do think it can be helpful. But on the other hand, a good lead investor, very networked with everybody at the beginning. If it's 2 or 3 investors, one investor can be the lead and work with the others, because they're very joined up. They talk all the time.
Yeah.
They don't argue all the time, do they?
That's another thing that's probably interesting. When you start a company and you're kind of thinking about your roles, and one of of the guys in the team or one of the girls in the team says, well, I'm going to be the CEO. It's an interesting decision you make because, it turns out that life changes once you're a CEO because you're managing up much more than you ever thought, probably. I mean, you really manage your board a lot, and you lose, that direct impact probably on some of the more technical and scientific things in a company, and you hopefully find someone who can really take care of those things. Was that a difficult decision, or, I mean, is that a wrong observation that, you kind of have to make a decision to kind of manage up to your board rather than, really managing all the details in your company?
I think it depends on the company. So I don't care if I'm CBO or CEO, I don't really care. It doesn't worry me. I mean, the ones I'm doing now, I let my mate be CEO, and I'll be CBO. You just say, all right, you do that. Because I said that in that particular company, the CEO role is, talking up to he's got a group of existing shareholders that are, I don't know the high net worth, but they're rich enough. And now we're going for VC, and we're going with, this will scare you, with the bank funding as well, but equity funding. So you should never do that, but that's what we're doing. But because that sounds really complicated, I'll let him do that, and I'll do the CBO on that one. So yeah, I think, I don't want to put, yeah. Anyway, CEO role is tough. When you, at the start it's nice, because you're still with the science, but then it gets tough because you start sort of losing your science a bit because you are having this interaction on the financial side. So that's when I say it gets tough, because there's a lot of really tough decisions that are not easy to make when you're starting to run out of money. That's a CEO, that's where you see a strong CEO come in. So yeah, CEO role's tough. Don't think it isn't.
Okay, so to switch gears, yesterday we had, several discussions where the word risk came up, and, I think managing risk and understanding risk is probably one thing you have to do on a daily basis. So the question really is, are there any particular ways how you approach risk, and have you kind of changed, the way how you approach and assess risk over the years? And this could be, both, it could be risk on the money side and can be technical risk. I mean, how do you, decide on your spin-out companies what the risk is, Roger?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you're always trying to minimize risk to the extent that you can, and with spin-outs, I mean, so I try to evaluate them realistically in terms of whether there's a real good value equation there, whether a reasonable investment can take you to a very good place in terms of increasing value. And if I don't think a project has that, I probably don't work too hard on it, because I know it's not going to be successful. So, I mean, I don't think you take crazy risks, and you just try to minimize the risks as you go.
Very hard. Very hard. I'm a very stupidly risky person, so don't do what I do, that's for sure. But risk is usually underestimated. Certainly the good thing while you're young, and believe me, you're young compared to me, is that you don't know the risks that you're taking on, which is great, because they can wear you out, worrying about them, trying to be in control of things you can't control, if that makes sense. But there are, financial risk is just what, in fact, financial risk is the one you can sort of all of them, sort of reasonably control. But, technical risk, your R&D risk, things fly out from the ether you never expect it. Clinical risk is scary. On your IP, the risk there of, infringing or people destroying your position. It's so multifactorial. There's no way anybody, I don't think, can really believe they're in it or reasonably can minimize. You want to minimize it, really, for your own sanity, but I think elements of it you just try to ignore. You know it's there, but to actually carry on your day job, you can't be constantly looking at all there because it's a lot of it's out of your control. So yeah, there are things you can, it's the known unknowns and all that stuff, the unknown unknowns. But yeah, it's very, very tough to really be in control of the risk. But we are, because we're in this audience, risk takers, I hope. So it's what we thrive on. So yeah, take it on. Take it on.
Developing products for healthcare is a risky business, so there's risk there. I think the issue is you need to have some, or you need to try and understand what that risk is in various different categories. So, technical risk, you need to understand as much as possible what the most risky points are and try and build in some way of addressing that. So, the killer experiment, or the thing that actually allows you to be able to say, I know that at that point I have a greater confidence on the technical side. I mean, it's not always easy to do, but it's clearly something it behoves people who are trying to take assets developments through in this particular area to address. I mean, commercial risk, I think you need to understand your market, and in an area where maybe you're looking at things which will disrupt that market significantly, that becomes also quite difficult to do. I mean, the commercial analysis, I mean, I'm quite sort of a strong believer of this, is if you can really understand what the market is, when you come to sell what you're actually selling, that actually is a hugely valuable marker point. And therefore, understanding what the risk is, both from competitive technologies, competitive products, the way that market's going to develop is also extremely important to do. And I mean, my personal experience is that companies have sold as much on the commercial opportunity and the fact that this is addressing something which is not clearly addressed, and that has been clearly enunciated and demonstrated, and that risk has been clearly addressed, sold the company as much as the technical data that we had on the company.
Yeah, but the thing is that risk is not a thing on its own. You don't start companies because they're risky, right? Oh, that's really risky, I better start a company there. You start a company because there is return for that risk. So if you have not got elements of risk in your company, you may not be getting a big return, right? So I don't know if there's an absolute correlation between risk and return. The higher risk, the higher return. May or may not be true. But you've got to dial that, you've got to dial up how much risk you're prepared to take. But then, while you need to know about the market, what is the return on that risk? So if they're in balance between it's hugely risky and it's only going to make thousands of quid, that is wrong. If it's really low risk, right, and makes you massive money, you're there, right? But presumably, the riskier it is, well, that's what investors like to believe. It's risky, but it's return is what they're thinking about, return. Okay, so it's that if you're not prepared to take any risk, don't start a company.
So, but in that respect, just to follow up, I mean, I find that investors, and you can comment on this, don't really like commercial risk. Which is to say the possibility that you're going to solve all the technical risks.
Correct.
And then there's not going to be a market.
Correct.
Yeah.
Investors don't like that.
Correct.
You're right, Roger. So because I'm now with a fund that does look to building a profitable company, not to selling it on to pharma, it's a very different philosophy. So we think a lot about the market, the positioning, who's going to buy it. And that panel session yesterday that I enjoyed most was the payer session. What I spend a lot of our time at the moment thinking about is when you've got this wonderful project and it's truly innovative and it's groundbreaking and it's disruptive, what is the supply chain for that in the market, and what's the payment structure going to be 10 years from now? And the three areas we're investing in have all got those challenges and problems. They've got huge risk, so it's gene therapy revisited, But gene therapy in a market, as kind of came up in discussion yesterday, where one dose is curative. So you treat the prevalent population and move on. Interesting financial model for that. Yeah. Second area within is cell therapy. As, of course, in oncology, the CAR therapy space is very, very hot, looks highly efficacious, a little scary, a little dangerous. But the infrastructure you need for that in supply chain for autologous cell treatment is something that's really not there. And most pharma shies away from and says, we don't do that. Well, guess what? It needs to be done. So we think about that, and that has huge regulatory risk in it. So you need to work with the regulators on the world. And the third area, which is dear to my heart, we're investing in deeply, is massively parallel large-scale linked clinical genomics. And the risk there is, I'm not sure what the business model is, but it's going to be very, very important. And the IP is entirely different. It's not, I'm so used to being a chemist and thinking there's my molecule, there's my structures, there's my utility. Actually, it's the data that's worth something and its referenceability. How will that be monetized? Who will pay for it? How does that translate to health economics in saving in the treatment, medication, and other paradigms? So the bits I worry about are, I think, from the market backwards. And I think when I first got involved in a startup, I thought from the molecule forwards.
I think that's a great observation. I mean, that really has changed, in the 20 years. The science is interesting, but if you don't connect your piece of science with the realities of the market, you never get there.
Right, when I started gene therapy, Jens, I wrote in my prospectus the market size that I expect to hit with gene therapy, one-shot cures and all that stuff, right? And a document, nowadays you can get these market analysis. Some bugger used all my bloody data, and I'd just done that, back of fag packet stuff. They used my data and sold it. It was, hang on, I recognise this, all my data. The problem, so one of my companies is a CAR T company, and I still don't think, I don't know how we're properly going to reimburse that. So you can say we start these companies with good idea what the market is. I'm not sure even the experienced entrepreneurs do that. I've got a big problem with CAR T therapy. I know it's what I want to be in because I'm in it, but it's really tricky to know how it's going to be reimbursed. Yeah. And I don't think, and Novartis are in it, and I don't know, they've got a different view clearly to how I'm thinking of doing it. I'm sure they're right. So it's not clear. What we have got is really good science going to that area. So it's tricky when we don't know what the market is, because I thought gene therapy in the '95 was got all these markets, but it went down the pan for a bit. So it's not as obvious. We can all think we know what the market is. I think it's not. There's lots, say, cancer patients, X number, we're going to hit them. But it's too complicated for the human brain, really, to go from where we have now to in therapy to think of all the risk, etc., going up. We can make the models, but at the end of the day, running it is the key. Get on with it, do it. If the market's reasonable size, you'll get there. But there's so much stuff that's going to go on in the meantime. You just need to start it and run it. I always get the Rubik's Cube right. What did the guy that invented the Rubik's Cube think the market was going to be?